Hjertelig velkommen hit til dette foredraget. Vi er så heldige at vi har fått med oss et par amerikanere. Og ene skal jeg introdusere dere nå. Og hjertelig velkommen til Stephen Cady, helt fra United.
As he said, my name is Stephen Cady, and I think there's lots of different ways we can introduce ourselves, so I'm going to try some different ways. Introductions. I am husband to Emily. I'm father to Ellie and to Charlie, and I'm a student at Princeton Theological Seminary where I'm in my third year. I'm working on a PhD in youth ministry, and specifically issues around adolescence and worship. All right. I'm also the minister at a small, and people kept asking me, what do you mean by small in the United States? And for me, it is a very tiny congregation. It's about 35 members, and we have about 50 in worship on Sunday mornings. So I'm the minister there throughout, but I think all of us have a different title, and so I'll put that one up too. Child of God. And I say that up front for a couple of reasons. One, to clarify that I'm not God. All right? Meaning, I don't have all the answers to all these questions. And I'm really hoping that part of our conversation today can help to figure out what it is that's going on in regard to worship with adolescents. So I say that, to put up as much humility as I possibly can. I'm going to present you my research and some of the things that I've found and some of my hopes and thoughts about this, but I really am hoping also to learn from you, and especially since I'm in a context outside of my own. But I also say it because, for me, this is part of what it means to be a Christian. Part of what we recognize in youth ministry, and part of what we're helping youth to do is to answer the question, who am I? And for me, that question is fundamentally answered by, I am a child of God. So, before we move on, we should ask, why the heck are we talking about worship? Because the advertisement said how to communicate the gospel to youth. I think it said communicating, but whatever. How to communicate the gospel to youth. And then I added through worship. And I say that because there's lots of different ways that we communicate the gospel to youth. And I think there are both informal and formal ways. Who can give me some examples of informal ways that we communicate the gospel to youth?
Our actions.
Our actions, sure. I don't know who said that, but yeah. All right, yeah, our actions. What are some other ways?
Singing.
Through singing? Okay, yeah. And even whether it's through singing at church or just singing as we're vacuuming or something, right? It says something about who we are as Christians. Any other ideas about informal ways we communicate the gospel? Conversations, yeah. I think there's lots. We could go on and on. The way we organize our trips, the way the youth ministry functions within the larger ministry of the congregation, the way that our school systems are set up, all of it has something to do, especially in a context like this, right, that is where you have a state church. I would imagine that all of those say something about the gospel. Whether it says it positively or negatively is another question, but it probably says something about it. What about some formal ways that we communicate the gospel to youth?
Sermons.
Sermons, yeah, that's a pretty big one. Other ways?
Confirmation classes.
Confirmation classes, yeah, any catechetical instruction.
Bible histories?
Yeah, sure. Bible histories, any sort of structure that we put in place that is designed to help communicate some aspect of the gospel is a formal means of communicating the gospel. The reason why I'm dealing with worship, at least, is because I think worship is someplace where we have both informal and formal means of communicating the gospel to youth. And specifically today, I'm going to focus on what are some of the informal ways that we communicate the gospel to youth as a part of worship. And we use the term youth. Is that the same here? Like when I'm talking about youth, and I'm really referring to anybody from probably 10 years old until we can go all the way into 30. How's that? Does that sound about right? We're on the same with terms. I also want to say something up front. If at any point I'm saying something that you're like, what the heck is that guy talking about, just raise your hand or ask me, because my hope is not to lose each other in translation, okay? So please, don't hesitate to ask me any questions as we go here. So, why worship? Well, it's because I have two central convictions about youth ministry. The first is that youth ministry is fundamentally ministry, right? And when we think about it as just youth ministry, as if, you know, anybody in the congregation can only focus on one particular person or one particular age group, I think everyone loses out. Not just the youth, I think everyone loses out. The second, I think, because it's ministry, I think worship is at the very heart of ministry. It's what we do. It's why we're at church. We worship God. That's part of what we do when we get together. Jeffrey Wainwright, who's a Methodist theologian, he says, worship is the point of concentration at which the whole of Christian life comes into focus. It's what makes what we do and who we are, a child of God, makes sense. It's one of the ways that we come at that. For John Wesley, sorry to use all the Wesleyan people, but I'm a Methodist, so sorry. It's just not simply a part of our spirituality. It's what makes it make sense. So, I want to tell you a story. The reason I'm interested in this subject is because I was working at a church in Chicago. That's in it's a big city, probably the third largest city in the United States. And at a church, I was the associate minister. I worked with youth and adolescents, but I worked with everybody in the church as well. Youth ministry is ministry. And we started seeing this influx of elderly members from other congregations coming into our church. And finally one day I stopped and said, you know, not that we're not happy you're here, but why are you here? You know, why did you come from? I know you've been members at this other church down the road. And they said, well, it's a funny story. About a month ago, our church decided that they were going to start focusing on youth ministry. And so what they did was they fired the choir director, they disbanded the choir, they got rid of all of the pews in the sanctuary, they hired a band, they brought in the band, and during worship, they turned to the now folding chairs in the sanctuary and they said to the elderly members of the congregation, if you don't like it, then turn off your hearing aids. Yeah, I know. That's not normal. In my mind, this is a problem, right? It's a problem not only because we have a church now filled with youth who think they're the center of the world, but we have a church who's filled with youth who don't have the benefit of learning from the older generations. And we have older generations who don't have the benefit of learning from the youth. And I think any time we start to focus and say, it's just about you, or it's just about you, that we lose a major part of who we are as Christians. So that's why I'm interested in this problem. All right, so that's where I sort of came at and said, we should really do some thinking more about this. So, but part of the problem is, and Fred Eady, I'm going to use this book a little bit today. He wrote this great book called Book, Bath, Table, and Time. You can get the references there, but it's a really good book and I'd highly recommend it. He's a professor at Duke Divinity School, which one of the lecturers mentioned earlier today. I got Duke out of that, and Board was nice enough to translate for me, I think, most of the rest of it, but anyway, he mentioned Duke Divinity School, and that's where this guy teaches. But he basically said, whether strategically or unwittingly, many communities have indeed come to emulate the entertainment industry in their worship practice. Worship guests are offered worship performances targeted to their specific demographic tastes and designed to feed their desire for entertaining experiences. I don't know if this rings true at all for your context, but oftentimes when we want to attract youth to our churches, the first thing we do is change the worship style. Okay, well, youth, there's no way they're ever going to appreciate anything that we've ever done before, so let's get rid of the pews, let's fire the choir director, let's bring in a band, and let's do something totally different. So it ends up looking a little like this.
just about ready for the big show to start here in sunny Steepleville, and what a day it is. It just doesn't get any better than this. I'm Bob Cobb, joined by my colleague Taffy Battler, and you're looking at beautiful aerial shots provided by Airship Worship, now broadcasting in HD.
You love to see the players getting focused, getting their mind right, getting in the proverbial zone.
And here are the starting lineups, brought to you today by Stump & Sons Altars, keeping knees at ease since 1933.
Dan Robust, pastor, the Bamford Theological Seminary. Jerry Woodward, worship, Eastern Southwest Central School of Divinity. Frank Banker, associate assistant to the intern of the executive minister of community ministry.
Jerry, how is the injury?
You know, it's fine. There's some soreness. X-rays were negative, but I should be fine as long as I stay away from B-flat. So.
Are you worried about re-injuring it?
You know, as long as I play hard and play at my pace, I think I should be fine.
Have you ever bet on attendance?
What?
Have you ever taken anabolic steroids?
No.
Have you ever lip-synced worship?
Listen, we're about to get started here.
And here's the kickoff. And it's a slow play. Wow, that's big.
You're the home team. You want to have a surprise or two up your sleeve. What I call mix-it-up ability.
It sounds like the new Darlene Zek or Chic or Zeku.
Zeesh.
Is it Gigi maybe?
Darlene Zek.
Let's go to our sideline reporter, Billy Sturpot.
This crowd seems a little bit lethargic, but this town is known for late crowds, so maybe by halftime they'll be a little more into it.
It looks like Johnny Weems is headed for an early exit.
Chiefs fan. They play at 11.
Oh my, look at this, a huge error, enormous.
You're the media team. You're leading the league in fumbles. You can't let this happen. You can't let this happen.
Terrible timing, especially on the new song. Look at this crowd, it's bedlam.
Pandemonious.
And look at Maggie Jensen, veteran overloud singer. She hasn't missed a word. What a performance.
One of the greats, Bob. One of the greats.
Okay. All right. Now, I hope that you guys can appreciate the satire. That's not an actual congregation, right? But it gets you to the point that oftentimes we make worship about entertaining people, right? As if what we're doing is supposed to be entertaining. I have to tell you, my background is in theater. So I was an actor prior to going into the ministry. And as much as I enjoy performance, worship isn't a performance. Every time I'm doing a wedding, every time we have people come in or assisting in a worship service that I'm leading, I always make sure that I start off by saying to them, look, you can't mess this up as long as your orientation is right. All right? It's not a performance. So when you're doing a wedding and your best man faints, like mine did during my wedding, and then my sister fainted, like, you know what? It happens. It's a worship service, and as long as it's oriented still towards God, you really can't mess it up. So, what's the point then? Why am I talking about this if you can't mess it up? Right? That's a good question. Because I think there are more faithful practices in worship. And I also think that sometimes we miss that fundamental orientation. I think as much as we like to say it's about God, oftentimes in our worship services that are trying to appeal to everybody's individual tastes, trying to entertain as many people as we possibly can, we don't make it about God. We make it about us. So here's a disclaimer. 1, I have no idea about how this will translate into the Norwegian context. And I don't claim to know exactly what's going on in your churches, but I'm hoping that you might be able to tell me a little bit about how this fits and how it might not fit, what might be different. Also, when I'm speaking about worship today, I understand that there are individual practices of worship and that we all have those, and those are really important, but I'm mainly speaking about corporate worship and the kind of worship we do together. So as long as we can move forward with those disclaimers, I think we'll be good to go.